President Franklin Delano Roosevelt was elected in 1932 by a wide margin, and was re-elected by a wider margin 4 years later with the help of a massive electoral bloc that he created known as the New Deal Coalition. However, by 1940, cracks started forming within this coalition as they were contemplating what to do next, ultimately leading to Roosevelt to run for an unprecedented third term in order to keep his coalition alive, with him planning to do a similar thing in 1944. But there were a couple of factors that were a little worrisome. The biggest one being FDR not looking too good, with many predicting that he might pass away in the middle of this fourth term, which meant that his vice president would have to end up succeeding him should that happen. And to many within the Democratic Party, that was a huge issue, as FDR's VP at the time was former Secretary of Agriculture Henry Agard Wallace, who, like the last VP, was there purely to keep a faction of the New Deal coalition satiated. The issue being that Wallace was there to keep the left-wing members of the coalition satiated. So many of the more conservative Democrats who were heading the party, who were not fans of FDR's shift leftwards, were worried about an even more drastic shift in a possible Wallace administration. So many within his party began what has been described as one of the greatest political stories of our generation. A group of 5 prominent Democratic Party officials, Robert Hannigan, Edwin W. Pauley, Frank C. Walker, George E. Allen, and Edward Flynn, had begun to hold meetings with one goal in mind: take down Wallace. They just had to do 2 things: get someone else to run, and get FDR to back them over Wallace. Luckily, they had many names to choose from, so all they had to do was narrow it down, eventually settling on 6 replacements. Former South Carolina Senator and Assisting President James F. Burns, Kentucky Senator Alben W. Barkley, Industrialist Henry J. Kaiser, Speaker of the House Sam Rayburn, Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas, and Missouri Senator Harry S. Truman. Initially, Burns was the go-to replacement due to his closeness with the Roosevelt administration and him being the most conservative of all of the choices. But that was also one of his main detriments. He was a little too conservative, to the point where he would alienate 3 factions of the New Deal coalition: black voters, Catholics, and organized labor, and they were worried about some potential pushback from them, so he was put on the back burner. As much as they were not fans of certain factions of the New Deal coalition, they knew they had to appeal to them somewhat. I mean, they still wanted those people to vote for them. They just didn't want those people to have any sort of power in the ensuing administration. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The only 2 people on that list that had that power were William O. Douglas and Harry Truman. Douglas, because he could appeal to the left-wing members of the coalition, while Truman could appeal to that sort of Midwestern isolationist senator due to his closeness to people like Burton K. Wheeler. So they went to Roosevelt on July 11th of 1944 to pressure him with these 2. While FDR was hesitant to replace Wallace, he seemed more open to the idea of Douglas than Truman, as he didn't really know Truman that well, which led to the 5 saying, "Are you sure you want Douglas? I hear Truman's pretty good." Which would lead to Roosevelt to aptly say, "Bob, I think you and everyone else here want Truman." So he ultimately just gave a tepid endorsement of either of those 2 for the VP nomination, even going on to state that he would write a letter of recommendation for the 2. And shoot, I guess they succeeded. Roosevelt's mind had been changed. However, there were 2 problems that they hadn't considered: Burns and Wallace, both of whom were still actively seeking the vice presidential nomination. So the group of 5 held meetings with both of them, basically saying, look, you're out, these guys are in. But Wallace and Burns refused to drop out unless FDR himself told them he wanted them to bow out. So both would then call meetings with FDR to ask him what did he think. And during his meeting with Wallace, Roosevelt would say, "I hope it will be the same old team." And then he told Burns, "You are the best qualified man in the whole outfit, and you must not get out of the race." And if you've been paying attention up to this point, you notice that there is a massive problem with what just happened. FDR has, for all intents and purposes, endorsed all 4 people vying for the nomination, and gave all of them his blessing to be the running mates, thereby not settling the problem at all. For the very simple reason that FDR was a little bit preoccupied, dealing with the world war that was going on at the time. Combined with his obvious failing health. He was a little bit preoccupied to deal with the internal party struggles of the Democratic Party. So it seems like he just told everybody what they wanted to hear so they'd leave him alone and they could settle it themselves. Speaking of, you know who else wanted people to leave him alone? Harry Truman. Because he was afraid of the scrutiny that his family would face should he join the administration. So, while he did not tell people that he wouldn't accept the nomination, he planned to put Burns' name into contention so that people were more inclined to back him over Truman. As the Democratic Convention approached, things got even more frantic. Everybody desperately wanted Roosevelt to definitively say who he was supporting for VP, and a mere 2 days before the convention, Senator from Indiana and chair of the convention, Samuel D. Jackson, released a letter Roosevelt wrote to the convention specifically to address the woes of the VP nomination. The easiest way of putting it is this: I have been associated with Henry Wallace during his past 4 years as vice president, for 8 years earlier while he was Secretary of Agriculture, and well before that. I like him and respect him, and he is my personal friend. For these reasons, I personally would vote for his renomination if I were a delegate to the convention. And right after he sent that letter, Roosevelt would leave the country to talk with Douglas MacArthur about military strategy in the South Pacific. So the convention had to go on without him, with seemingly the final word reached on the matter. He wanted Wallace. July 19th, 1944. The 3-day convention begins. The schedule was supposed to go as such. On the 19th, a debate on the platform. The 20th, the ticket will be nominated. And the 21st, closing remarks. Things seemed calm at first. Wallace supporters were happy, but the Wallace opponents seemed happy too. Except for Burns, who, in deference to the wishes of the president, had announced that he would not seek the VP nomination, seemingly putting ease to Wallace supporters, as he was the only person who was actively seeking to run against Wallace. That night, the group had brought Truman in a room to talk with FDR over the phone as a last-minute call for an endorsement, with Roosevelt yelling to them, "Well, tell him if he wants to break up the Democratic Party in the middle of a war, that's his responsibility," before slamming the phone down. Day 2 of the convention, another wrench was thrown into the field, as Hennigan revealed a letter of his own, one that you guys might remember, which was a complete contrast to the letter that was released yesterday. "You have written me about Harry Truman and Bill Douglas. I should of course be very glad to run with either of them and believe that either one of them would bring real strength to the ticket." Which enraged Wallace supporters, who knew that this was just a last-ditch effort to make the party abandoning him. And they stampeded the convention hall, mimicking a previous stampede done by Wendell Willkie in the previous election, prepared for the intense balloting of the ticket. Roosevelt's nomination was very easy outside of some protest votes, and the eyes were on the upcoming VP nomination. But seemingly out of nowhere, the convention was adjourned for the day. And that was because the group of 5 knew that if the vote was held that day, Wallace would win easily. So that night, the five got to work to sway people away from Wallace. Truman biographer David McCullough wrote, "No one knows how many deals were cut, how many ambassadorships or postmaster jobs were promised, but reportedly, by the time morning came, Postmaster General Frank Walker had telephoned every chairman of every delegation." Day 3 of the convention, the pressure was on. No more delays, no more drama. It was finally time to begin balloting for the vice presidential nomination. Some Wallace supporters were barred from entering the convention out of fear of an incident like yesterday, and some of them were barred because they just didn't buy tickets for the full convention. Remember, balloting was supposed to be on day 2, so they only bought enough tickets for the 2 days they were going to be there. The group of 5 were confident today, even as the results were not 100% in their favor. Wallace was still leading the delegate count over Truman, but all the favorite son candidates that were chosen were ideologically closer to Truman than Wallace, so they simply needed to apply a little more pressure. And after another ballot, Wallace was officially booted from the ticket, and Truman was in. And we know what happened after that, with Robert being so proud of his work that he wanted his gravestone to read, "Here lies the man who stopped Henry Wallace from becoming President of the United States." And here is the tale of how a group of 5 powerful people stopped us from getting 2 potentially great presidents. Wait, 2? That's right, because not only were these people accused of sabotaging the chances of Wallace getting the nomination, there's also some accusations that they hurt William O. Douglas's chances of being the vice president. Remember how I said when they approached Roosevelt with the 2 options, he was leaning a lot more towards Douglas? And they had to keep pressuring Roosevelt to even consider Truman to be a possible running mate? Well, there is one accusation that they might have been just a little bit more than just pushy, with Hennigan being accused of intentionally swapping the names in the letter of recommendation in order to make it seem like Roosevelt was leaning more towards Truman than Douglas. And given the shadiness of what happened, can you really say that's unbelievable? Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and click the bell to notify when a future video of mine comes out. And if here's more content from me, consider supporting me on Patreon.